The knocking came like a gunshot against the storm. The girl flinched, but her mother didn't move. She just sat there, bare hands trembling around a stone she'd been trying to warm on the fireless ring of rocks. It was ash now, dead hours ago, and the faint warmth left in the hollowed-out tree stump couldn't keep them much longer. Snow hadn't just started falling. It had swallowed the woods, the slope, the ridge above, and if that knock had come from a man, and not the wind again, well, the mother didn't dare open her mouth just yet, because she knew what happened in these mountains when men came knocking during a storm. The knock came again, but not louder, not like a demand, more like a tap, like a branch tapping the side, or a child trying not to wake their father. Still, her hand crept toward the small whittled knife hidden under a pine sap cloth near her hip. She hadn't meant to keep it close for so many days, but a mother alone in a snowstorm with 2 children inside the shell of a hollowed log couldn't afford to be sentimental. The girl whispered, "Mama." The woman slowly looked over. Her voice was slow but sharp. "Don't say a word." The girl nodded, her breath barely fogging the air anymore, and the baby, still nestled inside the fur-lined pannier slung against the dry side of the bark wall, didn't stir. That scared the mother more than the knock. The hollow wasn't meant to be a shelter. It had been the first thing she'd found 3 nights ago when the trail vanished beneath the drifts and her feet bled through her boots. A windstorm had knocked the tree down who knows how long ago, and the base had split just enough to leave a cavity wide enough for her to crawl into with the children. It was angled downhill. Water would have poured in if she hadn't dug a narrow trench to divert melt. She'd cut pine boughs with a stone wedge, draped their old quilt over the opening, buried them all in layers of bark. She hadn't cried once, not since her husband died last summer, not even when the mule collapsed, and she'd had to decide whether to butcher it or keep walking. But she wanted to cry now, because the knock had come a 3rd time, and this time she knew it was a hand. She grabbed the knife. The quilt lifted, slow, and then it stopped, hung there, flapping just a bit. The woman didn't breathe. Then a boy's voice, small, maybe 6, maybe 8, barely came through the opening. "Ma'am, I think you got smoke in here." The woman stayed perfectly still. I saw the pine smoke. Then it stopped. But I saw your tracks too." Still no sound. Her hand gripped tighter. "I ain't gonna take nothing," the boy said. "My daddy fell through the ice. He was looking for dry wood. He said the lake might hold if we moved fast. But he didn't move fast enough." The woman's eyes flicked to her girl. The girl stared at her, frozen, not from fear, but listening, really listening. "I ain't trying to steal," the boy whispered again. "I just need to be warm." The woman finally found her voice. "How old are you?" There was a pause. 9, she waited. "You alone?" A pause again, then a sniffle. "My little sister's down by the creek. She can't climb right now. Her leg, I carried her. But she slipped, and now I can't get her up." The woman stood at once. Every muscle in her legs screamed. Her boots, stiff with frost, barely moved at first, but she tied the knife to her wrist and threw the quilt aside. The boy blinked at her from the blinding white, face blotched red and wet, nose running, mittens soaked through. He was barefoot in wet socks. "You said down by the creek?" she snapped. He nodded fast. She stepped out into the storm. The girl behind her didn't ask to come. She knew better. She pulled the baby closer and watched her mother vanish into the swirl of white. It was not just a creek, it was a drop-off. The storm had made it worse, piling snow on uneven ground. It took the woman several minutes to find the small shape lying under a ledge, half covered in drifted snow. The girl, no more than 5, was limp but alive, barely. Her foot was twisted at the ankle. The woman dug her out, her hands cracking open with every movement, and hauled her over her shoulders like she had the pannier when her own son had died during the last crossing. The boy followed, shaking so badly he couldn't walk straight, but he didn't cry. When they reached the hollow again, the mother turned and looked at the tree with sudden fear. They'd been 5 heartbeats away from being buried together with no one knowing. This was no shelter. It was a grave with a dry roof. Still, it was all they had. She stuffed the children in like nesting birds, laid the new girl beside her own daughter, pulled the last of the bark over them, and shoved the quilt back into place. The boy hovered outside. "You come in," she said. "You got enough room to breathe, and enough reason not to die." He climbed in, sat stiffly. She used the last scrap of mule hide to rub his feet, and then the snow deepened outside, and the silence grew, heavier than before. She looked at all 4 children. No fire, no more food, no way down, but she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She whispered, "I got a plan." And somehow, that word, plan, was enough to stop the girl from crying, even when her stomach growled, enough to make the boy's shoulders drop just slightly, like someone older had finally taken the load. The mother pulled a strip of linen from her own arm, where she'd been binding an old cut, and wrapped it around the stranger girl's swollen foot. She didn't need to know their names yet. All she needed was a way to keep them warm without fire, a way to turn bark, snow, pine sap, and the hollowed gut of a fallen tree into something like a womb, something that could hold 5 lives a little longer, because she knew. The next storm wasn't waiting. It was already circling the ridge, and if she didn't work fast, they'd all freeze before morning. The night settled like a weight, heavy and stifling despite the cold. Inside the tree's hollow, the silence crept in too quickly, too completely, for a shelter meant to hold life. The mother didn't sleep. None of them did, not really. The children drifted in and out, shallow breathing, limbs twitching from dreams half forgotten, and the body's desperate urge to move for warmth. The mother could feel her girl's skin under her arm and knew it had dropped another notch. The strange girl's foot had stopped swelling, gone pale, thin, but her pulse still ran. Barely. That was something. The boy coughed in his sleep, hard and dry, the kind of cough that clawed at the ribs like a warning. His breath rasped afterward. The mother reached out in the dark and pulled him closer, sliding him between her own daughter and the wall of bark. No one protested. At this point, human heat was more precious than food. The hollow stank now, of bodies, of old pine, of mule blood dried into the pannier and the underside of the hide curtain. But it also held warmth, just barely, the way a breath stays trapped in cupped hands. That was enough to keep them another hour, maybe. But the snow outside was building towards something bigger. She could feel it. It had that silence, like the whole mountain holding its breath, the stillness that only comes before something gives. And when it gave, she had no illusion it would be merciful. By first light, or what passed for it in the haze of the whiteout, the woman knew she couldn't keep them buried inside any longer. The warmth wouldn't last. The air had turned wet with trapped breath, and the girl, her own girl, had started shivering again. That meant she'd stopped shivering during the night. A bad sign, a very bad one. So she took stock. One bone-handled knife, dulled, a length of twisted mule rope fraying at both ends, a saddle blanket stiff with old blood, a wooden ladle, cracked, 2 cracked flints, neither sparking anymore, a single tin can, clean but useless, and the fire ring, cold, blackened, full of ash that smelled like failure. She needed insulation, not just layers, real insulation, something to trap heat, not just block wind. That was when she remembered the hollow beneath the log, the dug trench she'd made to divert meltwater. It was still there, narrow, about 2 feet deep and running 6 feet out the front end of the stump, carved crooked around the bark. She'd thought nothing of it after the first storm passed, but now she saw it differently. She dragged herself outside, wrapped in both blankets, teeth clenched so hard her jaw clicked with every step. The world was white, not just snowy, obliterated. Trees vanished into nothing 5 paces out. Snow coated the world in layers like a winding sheet, and the wind wasn't howling. It was breathing, slow, deep, cold as bone. She didn't have long. She dug into the trench again, scraping with bare hands, then with the tin can, then with a split pine knot. She didn't stop. Her fingers bled. The snow filled in around her knees, but she kept widening it, deepening it, until she could lie flat inside it and see the low end of the tree bark arching like a rib above her. She felt under the tree's flank. Yes, it was hollow further in, not wide, but deep, just enough space for a nest. She backed out, panting, visions swimming. Then she crawled back into the main hollow, where the children huddled together, breath fogging the inside bark. "I'm gonna dig under," she said quietly. The boy looked at her. "Under what?" "Under us, into the earth, down the length of the tree. If I can make it deep enough, we can crawl inside it, get below the snow line, seal it from above, use the air from the trench, and stay warm." "That won't work," he whispered. We'll get buried anyway." The girl stirred. "Mama?" The woman leaned down, kissed her forehead. "You stay here, sugar. Mama's gonna make the cold go away." And with that she crawled back out, tied the mule rope around her waist, wedged one end through a split in the bark, and began carving into the underbelly of the log. She wasn't building a fire pit, she was digging a grave, but this time she meant to survive inside it. By mid-afternoon, though it could have been night for all the sky told her, she'd carved a low cavity deep under the trunk, scooping frozen dirt and snow out until it formed a rough hollow, about 4 feet deep, narrow but domed, packed along the sides with pine boughs and strips of bark. She tore from the dead wood around them. She didn't stop. Her arms trembled like torn cords. Her breath came short, blood on her lips ribs from split gums. But she kept going. She dragged in the saddle blanket, nailed it to the underside of the bark using sharpened pine slivers, and sealed the top of the dugout. She left only a thumb-wide air channel toward the trench. When it was done, she crawled back into the main hollow. The girl was nearly unresponsive now, and the stranger girl's foot was white as wax. The boy looked up at her. He didn't ask anything, just held out his hand. Together, they started pulling the children out of the hollow and into the trench, then down the trench into the new dugout under the tree, one by one. It took nearly an hour, but it worked. When the last of them was inside, the woman collapsed beside them and yanked the hide curtain down over the trench's front edge. Bark sealed it. Snow piled fast over the seams. Inside, darkness settled like a womb. Warmth didn't come right away, but it came. Their breath stopped fogging. The baby, pressed between the women's stomachs, started to sweat, and the girl's hands turned pink again. The mother lay there, back to the cold wall, staring up at the wood ribs above, listening to the storm howl outside like wolves clawing at a casket they couldn't open. No one talked, no one cried, and yet, for the first time in 3 days, they weren't dying. She rubbed each child's chest, checked their nails, checked their lips, checked their pulse. Still alive. She reached up and braced the hide tighter, wedging bark around it to seal out the wind. Then she finally leaned back and whispered, "We'll wait it out here." The boy spoke from the dark. "How long till it's over?" "Long as it needs to be." "What if it snows so much we can't dig out?" The woman didn't answer, because that was the real plan all along. She knew this wasn't a shelter. It was a tomb with the door propped open, but it was better than the hollow stump, better than freezing in plain air, better than burying children under snow. All she needed now was time to get their warmth back, time to figure out the next thing, time to survive. And if they couldn't dig out, well, they'd just have to find a way to burrow through. She closed her eyes and felt the heartbeat of each child around her. She matched their rhythms with her own. She wrapped her legs tighter, pulled the saddle blanket closer, and in that silence, wet, dark, earthy, she did something she hadn't done since the fire took her home 3 winters ago. She whispered a prayer, not for rescue, not for mercy, but for the strength to hold the roof in place. The dugout was shrinking, not in size, not in space. They still fit, barely, curled like coiled roots in the narrow chamber beneath the tree's spine. But the air, it thickened. Each breath came heavier, slower, like the earth above was pressing inward, squeezing time out of them grain by grain. The snow outside hadn't stopped, not for a moment. The storm settled into a kind of silence that meant only one thing in the high mountains: entombment. No gusts, no cracks of wind through the ridgeline, just endless falling, snow as soundless as ash, falling and falling, sealing every gap in the world. She'd left the trench open just enough to breathe through, wedged bark and hide over it at an angle, hoping snow wouldn't fully clog the channel. But even that little vent had slowed. Inside, the air grew damp and stale, warmer but wrong, the kind of warmth that didn't comfort, the kind that warned you something else was being stolen. Her own breath caught her first. She woke from the thin rest of exhaustion to the feeling of her chest pulling too hard for what it got. She blinked in the dark, total dark, and reached over to the boy. His chest rose. Good. Then her girl, still warm. The baby let out a weak fuss, more breath than sound. She reached the last child, the injured girl. Her skin was clammy but not cold. Eyes fluttered when touched. Still here. But if the air stayed like this, that wouldn't be true tomorrow. She pulled herself upward, pressing her face near the vent, and inhaled as deep as she could. Damp, almost no movement. She let out a sound she hadn't meant to, a half cough, half gasp, and the boy stirred beside her. "Is it morning?" he asked. "No," she swallowed. "Storm hasn't stopped. Feels like it's been days." "It has." He didn't speak again, just lay still. But she felt him start to shake. The woman sat up as much as she could in the crammed space and pressed her head against the bark wall. It felt cold, still, but not ice. That meant they were deep enough to hold some ground temperature, maybe just above freezing. If they had air, they could survive like this for a few more days. If not, she pressed her lips near the trench seam and blew. Nothing. She tried again, more forcefully this time, and caught just the faintest wisp of air pushing back. Not a breeze, just a movement, enough to tell her it wasn't fully clogged yet. She shoved her arm into the trench, up past the curve of the bark, and into the soft pack of snow above. She couldn't reach far, but she could tell it was dense, wet, heavy. The next layer of storm would seal them in for good. They had hours, not days. Hours. She dropped her arm and slumped back, mind racing, fingers trembling not from cold but from what she was calculating. She'd built the shelter too well. It was sealed tight. That was its strength and its death trap. If she opened it now, the warmth would escape and they'd freeze again. If she didn't, they'd suffocate in their sleep. The baby would go first, then the hurt girl, then her daughter, then the boy, then her. She wasn't going to let it happen like that. She leaned over and nudged the boy gently. "You ever dig an air chimney?" He blinked groggily. "A what?" "You dig a second tunnel straight up, but you block it loose, like a beaver dam. It draws air in through one side and pushes it out the other, keeps fire pits from choking out underground." He shook his head. "I don't know how to do that." "I do." She crawled over the children and forced her stiff limbs out of the shelter, up into the trench, and out through the narrow vent at the edge. The snow was heavier than she expected. It had sealed the bark seams like tar, and she had to punch through with her forearms just to breathe again. When she finally pulled herself into the grey light above, she gasped. The world was gone. Everything was white, a whiteness that didn't end. The trees were buried halfway up their trunks. The ridgeline behind the log, a line she'd used to orient herself every dawn, had vanished. The storm wasn't howling anymore, but it hadn't stopped. Snow still fell, the quiet kind, the deadly kind, the kind that smothered without noise. She turned back toward the hollow and began digging at the far side of the log, where the wind wouldn't blow directly into the trench. She dug a new shaft, angled, tight, just enough to bore downward into the dugout chamber. Not to open it fully, just to reach the edge of the heat. Then she took the stiff mule blanket, ripped a long strip, and jammed it into the new tunnel, stuffing bark over it, loose but wedged, a makeshift filter. When she dropped back inside the dugout and pressed her face near the trench, she felt it. Air, slow, damp, moving. It worked. The chimney was drawing the stale breath up through the new shaft and pulling fresh air through the trench. Not fast, but enough. She didn't say anything to the children, just lay back down, covered them tighter, and let herself exhale without fear. They could make it another night. The boy leaned close, voice quiet. "You were a trapper's wife?" She hesitated. "No, miner." He nodded like that answered everything. It didn't, not really. But she wasn't about to tell him more. Not about the cabin they'd lost, the debt, the fire, the lawman who came too late, or the years that followed, wandering from mining town to logging camps, her husband breaking faster than the tools he swung, until the day his lungs finally gave out, and she was left with nothing but 2 children and a mule she couldn't afford to feed. Instead, she said, "My husband knew how to keep a fire going through the freeze. I watched." The boy accepted that. Kids in the mountains didn't ask questions unless they had to, and he already understood the truth. Whatever this woman had been before, it didn't matter now. What mattered was she was the only reason he wasn't dead under a drift somewhere beside his sister. He shifted beside her, pressing his bare feet near her side. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I'm cold." She nodded. "That's all right." She reached down and began rubbing warmth into his feet. They were raw and split from the socks he'd worn through days ago, but they were still warm enough to save. Then she did the same for the injured girl, still unconscious but breathing. She wrapped the last of the saddle cloth around the girl's bad leg and wedged a strip of pine to hold the angles straight. It wasn't medicine, but it might stop the bones from setting wrong. She wasn't a doctor, but she was a mother, and that meant she didn't need to know the names of every wound to understand how to hold a child through one. The day passed like that, not in hours, in tasks: rub feet, check breath, scrape trench, mend seam, hum lullabies, drink melted snow from the ladle, check the air again, repack the bark, turn the baby, shift the girl, rinse, repeat. Each task like a bead on a string, threaded not for prayer but survival. And slowly the children stopped shaking. The boy slept deeper. The baby nursed. Her daughter stopped grinding her teeth in pain. And when the mother finally sat back and pressed her head to the bark wall, she felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not hope, something quieter. A kind of stubborn belief that the earth wouldn't win just yet. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside the hollow beneath the tree's ribs, 5 bodies breathed in rhythm. Still here, still fighting, still warm. She could no longer tell what day it was. The light outside had flattened into a dull, endless haze. Nothing shifted. Not the wind, not the snow, not the shape of the sky above the makeshift chimney she'd gouged into the drift. At first it had felt like they were hiding from a storm, but now it felt more like they were hidden from time itself. The mother woke with a pounding in her head, not from pain, but from lack of air. It wasn't suffocating yet, but the warmth had built too high in the dugout, and the chimney wasn't venting enough. She felt the baby at her chest, flushed. The others were sweating too. Heat without air, a deadly combination. She shoved her way toward the vent, pushing bark aside, forcing herself to move, even though her joints cracked and her back ached like stone. She got her face to the trench and blew through it. Hard. Nothing. She panicked for a moment, clawed at the top, shoved her arm through snow. Then at last a sliver of wind came back, cold, fresh. She let out a breath and dropped her forehead against the bark, heart hammering. That was the balance now. Not warmth alone, not shelter, but oxygen, airflow. Every hour was a negotiation. Seal in too tight, and they'd suffocate. Leave it too loose, and the children would freeze again. She'd known this kind of balancing act before, years ago when her firstborn died of lung fever, and she'd slept beside him, hand on his chest, counting every shallow breath. But this was worse, because now she wasn't watching one child go. She was holding 4 lives in a tomb, made of wood and dirt and snow, and if one edge gave, all of them would vanish. She crawled back and began checking them again. The baby still suckled, weak but present. The boy had lost more color in his cheeks. He stirred and tried to smile when he saw her, but she could tell from his eyes. He was close to breaking, not his body, his spirit. "How long?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. He nodded like he understood. "You think my daddy ever made it back to camp?" She looked at him, saw the way he held that hope like a stone under his tongue, heavy, always there. He wasn't asking if his father was alive. He was asking if he'd been brave when he died. "He made it as far as he could," she said. The boy nodded again and turned away. Beside them, her daughter stirred and reached for the blanket. She pulled it up around her neck without opening her eyes. The other girl, his sister, was awake now too, pale, sweaty, but alert. She hadn't spoken in 2 days, but now she rasped, "Water." The mother dipped the ladle into a pouch of melted snow she kept near the wall. The water wasn't clean, but it was wet. She held it to the girl's lips and watched her sip, slow and weak. "Hurts," the girl said. "My foot." "I know. Did it break?" "Not all the way," the mother lied. The girl blinked at her, then smiled. "You're strong." The mother didn't smile back. She couldn't, but something in her chest cracked open at the words. Something she hadn't known was sealed. "You rest now," she whispered. The girl did. The storm outside raged on. By that evening, or what might have been evening, she made a decision. They couldn't stay buried forever. They'd survived, somehow, long enough for the worst of the storm to pass. But she couldn't rely on time anymore. She couldn't assume rescue would come. There were no search parties this deep in the mountains, no nearby towns, no wagon trails close enough to stumble toward. She'd left the last settlement almost a week ago, carrying her baby, her daughter, and the mule. She'd taken a risk, following a trapper's shortcut through the ridge, hoping to save a day's travel. Then the snow came early. Then the mule fell. Then she found the hollow log. And now here they were, 5 souls, warm, but running out of everything else. She would have to climb out, find a way down. She unwrapped the rope again, the old mule cord, fraying more with each use, and fashioned it into a kind of sling. Not for her, for the girl with the broken foot. If she could carry her, if she could keep the others warm long enough to return, if she didn't fall through the drifts and vanish into the white like her husband had. She ran the plan through her head 100 times. Dig upward, test the snowpack, mark a trail, find wood. Maybe food, maybe a landmark, something. She left just before dusk, or what passed for dusk. The boy tried to follow. She stopped him. "You stay," she said. "They need you." He looked scared. "I'm not your mama," she said softer. "But right now, you're the oldest one in here. That means you keep them calm." He nodded. She climbed up through the trench, past the seam, past the chimney, past the frozen bark. And for the first time in days, maybe 4, maybe 5, she stood above the snow. It was blinding. White hills in every direction. No path, no sound. The trees were ghosts, gray outlines under ice, buried to their necks. The wind whispered low, but there were no gusts, no cracks, no fresh flurries. The air had stilled. The storm had passed. It wasn't safe yet, but it wasn't death anymore. She moved. Every step punched through a crust of ice and into soft powder. She broke trail with her knees, pulling her body forward, crawling at times. The slope behind the tree dropped toward a ravine. That meant water. That meant a way down. She found animal prints. Deer, maybe a day old. Good. Where deer walked, men might too. She marked trees with a pine wedge, dropped bits of torn cloth from her pocket every few paces. Her hands bled, but she didn't care. She kept moving until she found a hollow at the base of a boulder. Dry, shaded, protected. Not big enough to move them all to, but a waypoint, a place to rest if she had to make a second shelter. Then she turned back. By the time she reached the hollow again, the light had gone gray. Not dark, just gray, the way snow gets before night. She dropped into the trench, pulled the bark back, crawled into the heat. They were still alive, still warm, still waiting. The boy looked up. "You found something?" She nodded. "We leave tomorrow." "You sure?" "No." The next morning she wrapped the broken-footed girl in the sling, laid the baby in a pannier of bark strapped to her chest. Her daughter clung to her side. The boy followed, holding a piece of bark like a sled, dragging what was left of the supplies. They crawled out, into the light. The snow crunched different now, wet, settling. They followed her trail back to the boulder hollow, rested, ate snow, then down the slope, for hours, then another hollow, then a dark shape in the distance, a cabin, barely standing, but real. Smoke rose from it, a hunter's shack. The woman didn't cry when they saw it. She didn't smile. She just kept walking. And when they reached it, and a man opened the door, stunned, staring at the ragged 5 souls that stumbled toward him, she only said one thing. "Stove work?" He nodded, dumbfounded. She stepped inside and let the warmth swallow her whole. The cabin was no palace. Its logs were warped, its roof sagged at the middle beam, and every nail in the door looked ready to fall out with the next gust. But inside, there was fire, real fire, not imagined warmth or trapped breath, or the slow, suffocating heat of a sealed dugout. The stove sat black and humming in the far corner, its iron belly churning red, throwing heat so steady that the woman's knees gave the moment she felt it on her skin. She caught herself against the doorframe, jaw clenched. She wasn't going to fall in front of this man. Not now, not with her children watching. He was older, maybe 60, beard gone grey, thick lines down his face like someone who'd lived too long on meat jerky and snowmelt. He wore no badge, no trapper's cap, just a patched canvas shirt and a rifle leaning against the back wall. But his eyes weren't cruel, just confused, and after a moment's silence, he stepped aside. "Get in," he said. "Quick, shut the door." She guided them in, first the boy, dragging the bark sled with the last of their supplies, then her daughter, who walked stiffly with one arm clinging to her waist, then the injured girl, still tied in the sling, eyes glazed but breathing, and finally the baby, whose cries were thin and high-pitched, but alive. The man closed the door behind them and latched it, then turned, stared, and said nothing. She set the baby down near the stove on a pile of spare hide, pulled the girl from the sling, and eased her onto the floor beside her. The boy collapsed beside them, back against the wall, staring at the glowing fire like it was a vision from some Bible tale. Her daughter didn't say a word. She just dropped beside her brother and let her eyes close, body shaking from more than cold. The man finally spoke again. "You got a name?" "No," she said. He frowned. "No?" She looked at him. "Not one that matters now." That seemed to satisfy him more than it should have. He nodded, fetched a kettle from the shelf, and poured snowmelt into a tin. "Wood's dry," he said. "Plenty. Stove'll hold. You hungry?" They didn't answer. He set the tin by the stove, dug into a crate, and pulled out jerky strips, a tin of beans, and something wrapped in paper. He didn't talk while he cooked, just worked, moving like a man used to feeding things that had nothing left to say. She watched him without speaking, not because she was wary, but because she didn't yet believe they were safe. Not really. The world had too many edges, and she'd walked across too many of them to think one warm room erased them all. When the beans were hot and the jerky soaked soft in the broth, he ladled out bowls, one for each of them. The smell alone made her dizzy, her stomach cramped with a sudden, violent need. But she handed the bowls to the children first, sat behind them as they ate. Only when their hands slowed and their eyes softened did she reach for her own. The taste was salt and ash and heaven. She finished in silence, then leaned back against the log wall and closed her eyes. And for the first time in days, in weeks maybe, she let herself feel something that wasn't fear. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close. They stayed 2 nights. The man didn't ask where they came from. He didn't ask where they were going. He just kept the fire hot, stacked wood by the stove, and left a kettle on the boil. He gave the boy a blanket and showed him how to hang it to dry boots. He found a length of binding cloth for the broken foot and let the mother splint it tighter. He kept to the other side of the room mostly, carving notches into a stick, marking something only he understood. On the second night, as the snow fell softer outside, and the world finally went quiet, he handed her a wrapped bundle. "Snow's melting, come tomorrow," he said. "Path to the ridge will show again. You head west, you'll hit timberline. Follow the bluff, you'll find the trail. Folks down there, settlers, they'll help." She took the bundle. "Why help us?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because I've seen it before." She waited. "Storms like this, they don't always kill right away. Sometimes they just bury, and folks don't dig deep enough to find what's underneath." He turned back to his fire. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. She packed their things that night. What little they had. The pannier, the bark sled, the cloth, a small tin of dried beans he gave her, a scrap of jerky, and the knife. But the most important thing she carried wasn't in the pack. It was in her chest. That stubborn, ugly, sharp-edged thing that had kept her crawling through drifts and gutting logs for shelter. That thing that had buried itself in the earth with 4 children and refused to die. She didn't have a word for it, but she knew it had teeth. They left before dawn. The man watched them from the doorway, rifle in hand, not in warning, just as a habit. As they crossed the clearing, the snow crunching under their feet, the woman turned once. He nodded. She nodded back. No goodbyes, no promises, just the kind of look two people give when they've both survived things no one talks about. The sky was pink in the east, pale sun rising. The trees no longer looked dead, just cold. The trail to the timberline would be hard. Days of walking, nights in bark shelters. But she knew how to keep a fire going now, knew how to split pine thin enough to light with a spark, knew how to dig trenches that wouldn't collapse, and how to breathe through packed snow. More importantly, the boy knew too. He dragged the sled behind them, slow but steady. Her daughter walked beside her, arm around her waist. The baby cried once, but quieted fast. The injured girl slept in the sling, foot wrapped in soft cloth, breathing easy. And the woman, mother, miner's widow, hollow tree builder, led them west, not with hope, not with fear, but with something deeper than both. A will like iron in the gut, a map burned into her skin, a story she'd never have to tell, because the children now carried it in every breath they took. And as they passed the ridge, and the cabin disappeared behind a hill of snow, she whispered one last thing to herself. We made it. No one heard her, but the wind did. It carried the words west, toward the next fire, toward the next shelter, toward whatever life waited beyond the storm.